I sat on the dragon throne in the Great Hall, wearing the red dress from when I was 15. Alan Watson walked in, his bloodied sword pointed straight at me. I stepped forward, pressing my chest against his sword. His hand didn't tremble at all. I grasped his sword and chuckled lightly, "I'll return my life to you." His grip was so steady that it made me feel a bit sad. Ding! Royal Story reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. I was the principal wife of Crown Prince Zack Torres. Since our marriage, everyone praised us as childhood sweethearts, a loving couple. But it had been over a month since he ascended the throne, and he still hadn't issued an edict to crown me as empress. 3 days ago, he brought a woman into the palace from outside, named Emma Ambler. On her first day in the palace, she became a noble consort, standing on equal footing with me, and Zack even considered making her empress. This made me very unhappy. So I brought some gifts to visit the beauty that Zack had hidden for 3 years. When Zack walked in, Emma had just collapsed at my feet, a mix of jewels and her blood scattered on the floor, looking incredibly beautiful. Zack rushed over, almost mad, questioning me, "Did you do this? Why did you kill her?" Gina took my dagger and handed me a handkerchief to wipe my hands. I said lightly, "Don't be so agitated, it's just a matter of killing someone." At that moment, Zack probably used every word he could think of to insult me. He called me venomous and extremely malicious. The more he spoke, the more excited I became, laughing until I was almost trembling. I squatted in front of Zack, wiping his tears dry. "She is dead, stop crying. What kind of image does an emperor have? I want to kill you." "Shoo," I placed a finger on his lips, "Your Majesty, you can't speak carelessly. The empress of the great dynasty must be me and only me. This throne was given to you by our Harper family. Remember, it was your misplaced affection that killed her." I casually brushed his hair back, caressing his cheek, smiling gently. "Since you pretended to be deeply affectionate from the start, you'll have to keep pretending for the rest of your life." Zack sat on the ground with bloodshot eyes, his dragon robe dragging on the floor, soaked with blood. His tears mingled with Emma's hair, creating a painfully bright scene. I called out loudly, "Someone, take His Majesty back to the palace. Betty Harper. I'm here. And I will always be here." I wanted to see him suffer. I would ruin everything he loved. Just like he ruined me back then. I was supposed to be the general's wife, standing by Alan Watson's side amidst the chaos of war. But that was impossible now. I was forever trapped in the square palace. The blood on the ground stained my dress. Thinking back to the day I wore my wedding gown, Alan came to stop the bridal sedan, but he was holding a sword against me. He stood on the long street, holding a sword like a killer god returned from hell. This god had traveled too long, and by the time he stood before me, he was already somewhat weary, yet stubbornly blocked my path. "If you step down from the bridal sedan now, I will take you away," he said to me. I was tightly bound with ropes inside the sedan, struggling desperately, but I couldn't make a sound. Alan let out a bitter laugh, saying, "You told me to believe you, and I did. You said it over and over, and I believed it each time. Even if my Watson family has dozens of men buried on the battlefield, with no chance to see life or death. In the end, what I received was the news of you in your phoenix crown and wedding gown, marrying grandly, becoming the crown prince's wife. Betty Harper, you really know how to deceive." With each word he spoke, my heart was torn open, leaving a bloody wound that hurt so badly I could hardly breathe. I wanted to tell him I wasn't willing. But my hands and feet were bound, and my mouth was filled with drugs. I watched helplessly as he smashed the jade hairpin I had given him onto the ground. Not even a single denial could escape my lips. "From now on, we have no relationship." That was his last sentence to me. Tears fell along with the scattered jade shards onto the long street. Watching him walk away, I suddenly felt that everything had lost its vitality. On the road to the East Palace, I suppressed all my emotions, quietly performing the wedding rites. When my veil was lifted, Zack's eyes held a hesitant apology. I said nothing, didn't cause a scene, just smiled at him, "Husband." He froze for a moment, then came over to embrace me, whispering apologies in my ear. I still remember the year I came of age. My aunt placed a hairpin on my head and asked me, "Betty, do you want to be the crown prince's wife?" I shook my head. I already had someone I liked. That person waited for me until I was 19, still unmarried. I couldn't let him down. My aunt looked at me with pity, but I didn't understand what that meant at the time. After Emma's death, Zach crowned me as Empress. That day, Alan returned from the border. I hadn't seen him for almost 3 years. At the banquet filled with the sound of silk and bamboo, Alan entered, no longer the same bright and carefree figure he once was. There was a newfound ruthlessness and maturity about him. With him was a woman, her hair tied up, dressed in simple attire, with a hint of heroism in her brows. She looked nothing like me. Perhaps my gaze was too intense, as Alan glanced at me, positioning himself protectively in front of that woman, his eyes filled with warnings. I stiffly forced a smile and asked, "Who is this beside General Watson?" "My fiancé," Alan replied flatly, clearly not wanting to talk to me. In front of everyone, he had to answer my question. Zach seemed to finally seize an opportunity to humiliate me. He laughed loudly, raising his glass to toast Alan. "Congratulations, General Watson, on finding a good match." "Don't you agree, Empress?" I locked eyes with Zach. The mockery in his gaze was unmasked, and I couldn't help but laugh aloud. "Yes, Your Majesty should grant them a marriage, completing this couple. The country is still unstable, and the battlefield is fraught with danger. I fear it would delay her. Once the situation at the border calms down, I will bring her back to thank the Emperor and Empress." His tone was calm, but my eyes felt stinging. He never looked at me even once from beginning to end. "I have you, and my heart is at ease." Zach and Alan raised their cups from afar, drinking them down in one gulp, just like back in the day. When they were young, Zach was often bullied. Once, after a bad beating, both he and Alan were bruised. He wiped the corners of his eyes clean and said, "When I grow up, I will be the Emperor. At that time, I will buy Betty countless red dresses and give Alan lots and lots of treasures, so we won't have to fight with anyone anymore. Then I will be the general to help you defend the borders. And I will be the general's wife." Every time, Alan would pat my head and say, "Then you must grow up quickly. If you're late, I will marry someone else." Those were such good times, but people change. The sound of silk and bamboo was making my head ache. "I don't feel well, I'll head back first." Just as I stood up, Zach pulled my wrist, causing me to fall into his arms. He affectionately leaned close to my ear and asked, "Is it your body that doesn't feel well, or is it your heart? Is there a difference?" I wrapped my arms around his neck, lifted the wine cup from the table, and brought it to his lips. "When I'm not happy, I'll make you doubly unhappy. Why should you bother like this, Your Majesty?" He opened his mouth and drank the wine from my hand, extending his tongue to catch the drops that fell onto my hand. To outsiders, it looked like a scene of affection between the Emperor and Empress. "The one you hold dear has not looked your way even once, he no longer cares about you." "I am indeed very unhappy," I said, my fingers tracing from his eyebrows down to his chest. "Let me think of something that can make Your Majesty suffer." "Oh, Emma Ambler hasn't been buried yet. What if the palace's tabby cat accidentally goes to her courtyard, without food or drink?" "You dare! Ha ha ha, just teasing you." Seeing his face suppressing anger made me happy. Cats are very picky eaters too. Mentioning Emma made his expression change immediately, his eyes filled with undisguised killing intent, and he squeezed out one word through gritted teeth, "Madwoman." I leaned close to his ear, my lips brushing against it. "You're the one who tied this madwoman to your side." I got up from Zach's embrace and gracefully bade farewell to everyone. After leaving the banquet, I clutched my chest and collapsed to the ground. Alan didn't need to show much disdain, merely ignoring me made me feel like I couldn't go on living. "Your Highness, what's wrong?" I then noticed Gina had been following me all along. I forced myself to stand and said to her, "Take me back to my chamber, the banquet is too noisy." Yes. Phoenix Ceremony Palace. These 3 characters were written by the late emperor for my aunt. Unfortunately, she has died, and now these empty titles are of no use. The people of the Torres family are all hypocrites. I locked everyone outside, smashing everything in the palace that I could, yet my resentment remained unrelenting. When I was 16, my family rejected Alan's marriage proposal because the emperor was overly suspicious. He didn't like anything that posed a threat to him. But I didn't understand. I had a big fight with my father and ran away from home, knocking on the Watson family's door in the middle of the night. When I saw Alan, I threw myself into his arms and cried, "Daddy won't let me marry you, everyone is against us being together." He stroked my hair and said, "It's okay, in this lifetime, I won't have anyone but you." Really? Yes. What if one day you have someone else? I will. What will you do? I bit down on his shoulder. I will marry her off to someone else and then kill you. All right, if that day comes, I will present my neck to your blade. The young general, who was decisive on the battlefield, always showed me all his gentleness. How could I not love him? I insisted on not going home, and he didn't force me, letting me stay at the Watson residence, finding various ways to bring me delicious food and fun activities every day. There were many rumors about me outside, but he carefully protected me, not letting me hear a single word. I loved to draw him. Because I liked him and wanted to draw him, I learned painting. No one in the capital could paint better than I could. Now I wanted to paint again. Just as I laid out the rice paper, a noise came from outside, and I angrily said, "Didn't I say no one is allowed to bother me?" As I walked to the door, a long sword was suddenly pointed at my chest, chilling me to the bone. "Your Highness, the Empress." Alan's voice was colder than the snow in the depths of winter. I turned to follow the voice and forced out a beautiful smile. "General, what brings you here? Are you still nostalgic for your old love?" "I just came to remind you not to have any inappropriate thoughts about Delia. Otherwise, I can guarantee that you, Empress, will soon become a corpse in this palace." Delia, the way he said her name was so intimate. I looked at him, not showing any fear, and moved closer to his sword. "I hadn't planned to do anything to her, but seeing how much you care for her, I'm not very happy." Holding on to his sword blade, blood trickled down my wrist. "Are you really going to kill me for her?" Alan yanked the sword from my hand, the sharp edge cutting into my palm, exposing the bone. What a pity. I probably wouldn't be able to hold a brush in the future. He saw the mess around and looked at me with a hint of mockery. "The Empress doesn't seem to be in a good mood." I instinctively took a step back, then tilted my head and smiled. "The young master of the Flores family seems not to have married yet. He might be a good match for Miss Sharp." His expression immediately turned icy cold. I watched him smile madly. "No one could have what I could not have." "Do you really think I wouldn't dare to kill you?" Alan grabbed my neck, his eyes crimson with rage. But being so close to me made me feel joyous. Even if it was hate, I wanted him to see me in his eyes. I raised my half-damaged palm, wanting to touch his face, but he dodged in disdain, tightening his grip around my neck. "You broke your promise. You said you wouldn't have anyone else but me in this lifetime." It seemed my words provoked him. He released me and tossed me aside, shards of porcelain digging into my knee, causing me to break out in a cold sweat from the pain. Back then, I was blind. This is my last warning to you. Don't wear down my patience. I won't. His back disappeared into the night, leaving me alone to perform this one-woman show. Not long after, Gina came in without asking anything and carefully treated my wound. "This hand. It's just useless now, there's nothing I can't say." She lowered her eyes to look at my knee. "In the capital, my dancing is the best. How many people tried hard to see me dance but never got the chance?" "Your Highness." "But I only wanted to dance for him. 2 years ago, when he returned to the capital, I danced for everyone just to show him. But he doesn't want to see me." Gina kept her head down, the light blue hairpin reflecting the candlelight turned dark. "Did you see anything tonight?" As she applied the ointment to my wound, she said, "Your Highness broke the porcelain vase and accidentally fell, cutting your palm." I lifted her chin with my other hand. "You need to stay this clever." I issued an edict to marry Delia Sharp to the third son of the Flores family, a good-for-nothing who spent his days wandering the brothels. Delia's father cherished his only daughter dearly. He indulged her even when she wanted to join the army. Now I've angered him. He controls more than half the military power in the capital, and Zach still has to consider his feelings. Zach came to question me about why I did this, but when he caught sight of the injury on my hand, his initial anger turned to mockery. He grabbed my injured hand, reopening the wound that had barely stopped bleeding, a large patch of red spreading out over the white cloth, a shocking sight. He squeezed hard, making me feel pain. You need to recognize your identity. Even if you die, you are still a member of the Torres family. I've always remembered that clearly. His blood-stained fingers gripped my face, leaving streaks of blood. Why can't you just behave a little? Then we could go back to how we were. Back to how we were. Can you bring the Watson family back to life? No, we can't. The three of us have long since fallen apart and can't go back. Why must you do this? Zach said, and for some reason, I saw moisture in his fierce eyes. But my hand hurt so badly that I could only make him hurt more. On the day Delia married, Alan hijacked the bridal sedan and took her to the frontier. Later, Alan rebelled. That day happened to be the Mid-Autumn Festival. Thinking back to a certain Mid-Autumn Festival, it should have been a day of family reunion, but at that time, I had a falling out with my family and stayed at the Watson residence. Everyone knew I was there, but no one could mention it. The Harper family especially couldn't come to ask for me back. Everyone was protecting my dignity. Colorful lanterns dazzled my eyes, tears streamed down my cheeks onto the lanterns, the candlelight flickered. A pair of calloused hands gently wiped my tears, and Alan asked if I wanted to go home. I looked up at him and then directly threw myself into his arms, my tears soaking his clothes as he gently stroked my hair, saying nothing, letting me vent my emotions. I asked him, what if one day father marries me off to someone else? Then I'll kidnap you and take you far away. What if the emperor wants to bring me back? He was silent for a long time, long enough for me to think he wouldn't answer. That was fair. I was being unreasonable. How could one defy the emperor's command? Then we'll overturn the court. What? I looked at him in shock, afraid I had misheard. I would be willing to be a traitor for you. The wind was strong that day, but every word was clearly etched in my mind. It had nothing to do with the future, just this moment. He said it. I believed it. Then I would be willing to do anything for him, even die. On the day Alan took Delia away, I stood on the city wall. I watched him ride away, Delia's fiery red wedding dress blending with the sunset. They seemed to walk through flames, merging with each other, leaving no space for anyone else. It was clearly the outcome I had envisioned from the start, yet the wind blew, and my face felt cool. Your Highness, it's time to return. Gina came over to drape a coat over me, looking in the direction Alan left, lost in thought. There are too few people in the palace, it feels a bit lonely. Tell the Ministry of Rights that it's time for a beauty selection. With more people in the palace, it would be lively. Zach had a few children, but they all ended in miscarriage. Zach was furious and ordered an investigation. The first person he checked was me. Is it you? No. After these concubines got pregnant, I kept myself shut away. He wouldn't even let me see them, not allowing me to send anything. He was guarding against me, yet those children still disappeared. Betty Harper. I said it wasn't me. He was somewhat stunned by my shout, his fingers slightly curling. I looked at him with mockery. Even if it were me, could you do anything to me? Would you dare to? I sneered, with this time, you might as well offer more incense to the Bodhisattva. Maybe it's because you have too much blood on your hands that the heavens want your children in return. Betty! Zach's forehead bulged with veins, poked at his sore spot, and he was furious. I covered my mouth and laughed, one hand on my chest, feigning innocence. Your Majesty, you scared me. Zach finally left in a huff, accidentally shattering the vase at my palace door. As childish as ever. If one child is an accident, then having several in a row can't be an accident, no one would believe it. Gina. Yes, Your Highness. Go out of the palace and spread the news that the young master of Consort Yates family is ill and that the Yates family has recently bought quite a few Tusenden fruit. I'm afraid some people don't know. Understood. The Tusenden fruit, originally a herb for clearing heat and reducing fire, can be deadly for pregnant women if consumed. Just a little each day for 3 months, and even adults might not survive. Naturally, the child would not be able to stay. The important thing is, common court physicians cannot detect any abnormalities. But there's no wall that doesn't let the wind through. I am always watching the movements in this palace. When rumors were circulating in the capital that the Yates family was plotting against the heir, I was busy playing with the little cat that Gina had brought back. Its tiny tongue was licking the gruesome scar on my right hand. Many in the court seized this opportunity to accuse the Yates family, but they insisted that the medicine was for their youngest son's illness. The Yates family had deep roots in the court, though not as powerful as the Harper family. They were loyal to the Torres family, acting like the vicious dogs of the Torres. Unless absolutely necessary, Zach would not act against them. In the end, the matter was left unresolved. But it didn't matter much. After all, Zach didn't care, and as a mere spectator, I only needed to clap and cheer after the play was over. That day, Zach sat in my palace, not saying a word for the whole morning. I knew he just needed a place to rest. He hated me and feared me, yet in this vast world, there was nowhere else he could find peace but here with me. I walked over and helped him remove his crown, gently caressing his face. "Your Majesty, you will have other children." He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the same fear and reliance as when he had just escaped an assassination attempt. "Your Majesty, let's have a child." What did you say?" Zach's eyes shifted slightly, and he unconsciously swallowed. I did my utmost to coax him. "Zach, I want a child." My every whim was built upon his sense of guilt towards me. He cared for me. As long as I softened a little, it would bring him joy. Shoo, I gently kissed the corner of his lips. "Zach, you once said you would give me anything I wanted." His gaze grew deep, looking at me for a long time before saying, "Okay." As I lay beneath him, I wondered if Alan was also entwined with Delia in this way. Zach cried, nestling into my neck, his burning tears flowing onto my skin, sending shivers down my spine. He said, "Betty, can we be as good as we used to be?" Betty, I hadn't heard that name in a long time. After returning home from the Watson residence, I had been imprisoned. I cried and made a scene, but my father only said it was for my own good. My aunt visited me twice. She looked much more haggard than I remembered. Even her jeweled crown and exquisite attire couldn't hide the despair in her eyes. The words I could think of at that moment were probably that nothing is more tragic than a broken heart. She said, "He wants to crown me as empress." But I didn't think she was happy at all. Doesn't Aunt want to be empress? I wanted to once, but not anymore. The royal family is truly terrifying. The emperor feared the Harper family, killing my aunt's child and framing noble consort Sutphin for it. He used countless rewards to compensate my aunt for that unborn child. But my aunt knew everything. She was tired and didn't want to play those tricks with the emperor anymore. She wanted to leave. Yet he sought to trap her with the position of empress. The second time my aunt came, for some reason, I held her for a long time. I felt that if I let go, she would disappear. She said, "Betty, you must be happy." She gave me a box, saying, "Take it and escape. Go to the border to find General Watson's family. I will take care of everything for you." Later, I learned that what my aunt meant by taking care of everything was with her life. The empress passed away, and the world mourned. The emperor didn't have time to care about me. As for the box my aunt entrusted to me, it was merely the emperor's cunning scheme. Just after I left the capital, I encountered Zach. He said he knew I would escape and came to see me off. Zach and I went together to the border. "Won't His Majesty be angry that you're not in the capital? Compared to being the crown prince, I prefer staying with you." Indeed. The three of us were meant to be together forever. General Watson had always liked Zach, so he let us stay. He said, "Alan has gone to transport supplies. He'll be back in a few days." I was happy to see him again. But when I woke up, everything had changed. The Northern Army had obtained our military's defense plans, and General Watson suffered a crushing defeat. That defense plan was in the box my aunt had given me and had been handed over to the enemy by Zach. In the heavy night, the person who took the defense plan from Zach revealed a profile I would never forget. That night, I heard him say, "The Emperor won't live long, the Watson army must perish. I will marry you and become Emperor." I didn't know what was originally in the box my aunt gave me. Our Emperor, so deeply in love, would still squeeze out the last value from my aunt, even if it meant death. I wanted to tell General Watson, but accidentally startled the person discussing matters that night. When Zach saw me, his eyes were filled with terror. He cautiously approached, wanting to explain something, but after a long pause, not a single word came out. "You have disappointed me too much." I turned to run, but dark guards pinned me to the ground. "Don't hurt her," Zack ordered the dark guards. "They are loyal subjects of Great Dynasty," I struggled fiercely, glaring at Zack. "But my father does not want loyal subjects with too much public support. They are the ones who protected you as you grew up." "Zack." I tasted blood in my mouth. "I'm sorry." Zack struck me, knocking me unconscious. When I woke up again, General Watson had already set off. I wanted to ride to stop him, but in my rush, I fell from my horse and injured my leg. As for Zack, he was likely already on his way back to the capital. When Alan returned, he found the corpses of the Watson army, 50,000 soldiers lying dead in the wilderness. General Watson's body was nowhere to be found. I couldn't imagine having crossed mountains and rivers, only to cause so many deaths. Alan's eyes turned red. He was perfectly fine when I left. I didn't know how to answer him. The lives of dozens of people in the Watson family, 50,000 soldiers, I truly didn't know what to do. At that moment, a supervising officer appeared from nowhere and rushed towards me. He accused me of giving General Watson false information, leading to the massacre of the Watson army. I recognized him. He was the same person who had spoken with Zack that night. Absurd. Alan firmly protected me. You ask her yourself. You brought a box when you came, right? Where is the box now? I don't know. It's in the old general's tent. If you don't believe me, the young general can go see for yourself. I froze in place. I knew there must be something in the tent. They had been plotting for so long. Those things must have been prepared long ago. What I feared was not knowing how to face Alan. Perhaps sensing my emotions, Alan turned to look at me, his eyes frighteningly red, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "As long as you say it's not true, I will believe you." I should say it's not true. But facing the countless lives lost in a tragic death, that sentence just wouldn't come out. Apart from crying, I felt I couldn't refute anything. Alan wiped away my tears and said, "If you don't say it is, then I will consider you haven't done anything." Hearing his words, I cried even harder. Clearly, I was the one who had done wrong. He added, "You didn't do it on purpose, right?" I nodded. "You had your reasons." I nodded again. "You were being used." I continued to nod. He was too good to me. His heart was suffering 1,000 times more than mine, yet he was still trying to think of various reasons to comfort me. How could I bear to let down someone like him? I was pregnant. Just then, the divine Dr. Wisdom came to the capital, and Zack asked her to help me secure the pregnancy. He was probably scared too. In fact, I had known Wisdom for a long time. Years ago, when Zack was attacked, Alan had fallen into the valley while trying to save him. I searched for Alan for 3 whole days, dragging him step by step, kneeling outside the medicine valley to beg Wisdom to save him. At that time, I had worked hard to prepare medicine for her before she agreed to revive Alan. This time, it was also me asking her to come. When Wisdom checked my pulse, she showed a troubled expression. "Are you really going to do this?" "Yes." I touched my slightly bulging belly. There was a child inside, my child with Zack. "Maybe it would be a beautiful princess." "What about your family if you do this?" "They won't be in any trouble. Even if a new emperor comes, the Harper family will still be the Harper family." The Harper family had deep roots in the Great Dynasty. Pulling one hair could move the whole body, and no one would want to provoke this trouble. Even the cruelest former emperor only killed one child of my aunt. If it were Alan, he wouldn't harm the Harper family. Because what we wanted was the same. "Wisdom, please prepare a bowl of abortion medicine for me, preferably one that could take half my life." Who would dare let me give birth to the child? Zack might not care, but the Yates family wouldn't. That day, while Zack was having dinner in my palace, Consort Potter sent over some dishes, saying they were freshly made from the small kitchen, asking me and Zack to try them. "Put it down, Consort Potter is thoughtful. Your Majesty, please try it." Zack grabbed my hand that was serving the dishes, his gaze fixed on me, showing no emotion. "Your Majesty, aren't you going to eat?" "Betty." "I'm here, Your Majesty, why did you suddenly call me?" His eyes never left my face, as if he wanted to see something from it. If you don't eat, I will. Do you really have to do this? I could hear the desolation in Zach's voice, along with a hint of pleading. Is this where our deep feelings as husband and wife end after these few months? Seeing him lay it bare, I stopped pretending and smiled slightly at him. The small kitchen of Consort Potter always has great flavors. I flashed a brilliant smile, taking his hand and placing it on my belly. Your Majesty, do you think it's a prince or a princess? Zach remained silent, staring at me intently. Please, I beg you. I ignored his expression, picked up the medicine that had been prepared earlier, and drank it in one gulp, leaving Zach no time to stop me. You really hate me this much? Yes. I hate your Torres family. It was a deadly red flower, taking half my life directly. It hurt so much. Lying on the bed, there were several moments when I felt I was about to die. If it weren't for wisdom by my side, I truly wouldn't have dared to be this ruthless with myself. The Yates family knew I had wisdom around and dared not use the same trick again, instead borrowing Consort Potter's hand to kill me. But I had been waiting for her. In my daze, I seemed to hear Zach's voice. He was crying so sadly. I couldn't tell if he was crying for our unborn child or for me. He seemed to have done nothing wrong, he just wanted to live. But the Torres family's reputation was lost, the foundation was crumbling, and he couldn't hold on. In my near-death state, I seemed to return to the past. On a spring outing, with peach blossoms fluttering, Alan reached out his hand to me in his black attire. Betty, come quickly, Zach caught a lot of fish. You're in for a treat. Zach waved the fish in his hand to greet me. Betty, am I amazing? Amazing, but Alan is still a tiny bit better than you. Say that again, who is better? Zach splashed water from the river at us from afar. You've dirted my dress. I'll pay you 10. That's because my future husband is better. Shameless. I was bickering and playing with Zach, while Alan was beside us, cooking fish over a fire. In the middle of it all, he made me a peach blossom crown. After we ate and drank our fill, lying under the peach tree, I said, we should always be together. Year after year, the flowers are the same every year we have today. My child is gone, and so am I. After I recovered from my illness, it was my first time looking in the mirror, and I smashed everything reflective in the palace. My once proud face has aged over 10 years. There is no one left who appreciates me, so it doesn't matter anymore. I touched my empty belly. I thought I wouldn't feel sad, but after truly losing something, the heart-wrenching feeling hasn't diminished at all. Child, I'm sorry. In the next life, find a good family to be reborn into. Don't encounter me again. Alan's army is about to enter the capital. Before he arrives, I must clear away all obstacles for him. The Yates family, the greatest tumor hanging over the great dynasty. As long as they stand, the court of the great dynasty will forever head toward decline. Zach knows this, so he hasn't exposed me. The Harper family understands as well. They've known since my aunt's death. I once asked Alan what his greatest wish was. He said, to see the great dynasty flourish. I must help him achieve it. Following the line of Consort Potter, I had Gina take out the evidence I had prepared long ago, pointing directly at Consort Yates and the palace. Under severe punishment, Consort Yates's maid detailed how Consort Yates had caused the death of the palace's concubine's child and how she planned to do the same to me. Consort Yates and the Yates family plotted, but they miscalculated one thing. Zach's kindness toward me is 1,000 times more than anyone else's. I did not wrong her, every single event was her doing, and she can't deny it. I was just giving her a final push. Now that things have come to this point, even if Zach wants to shield her, there's no way. The Yates family, along with Consort Yates, has harmed the royal heirs and mistreated the concubines. With Commander Sharp and the Harper family pressing hard in court, Zach had no choice but to strike hard against the Yates family and Consort Yates. The day Consort Yates was sent to the Cold Palace, I went to see her. The once beautiful woman, even in her downfall, was still charming. In contrast, my face, which had lost its beauty, seemed somewhat disheveled. She looked at me and smiled, without a trace of hatred, saying, "It's just a matter of winning or losing. I lost, but you won't necessarily win either. She was right, my ending would only be worse than hers. I touched her delicate face, and in an instant, her expression turned hideous. The Yates family has fallen, and the Torres family has lost its last support. Alan's army is stationed outside the city gate and will soon attack the capital. On the eve of the great battle, Zach brought wine, looking like a down-and-out young master. He said, "Betty, stay and talk with me." I sat beside him, just like in the old days. "Zach, you're not suited to be an emperor." "Indeed." He let out a bitter laugh, downing most of the wine. "Back then, my father gave me two choices." Zach looked deeply at me. "In the end, I owe you all. Do you know? On the day of our wedding, I prepared for countless scenarios, thinking that even if you cried, ignored me, or hated me, I would protect you for a lifetime. When I lifted the veil and saw your eyes calm like water, I knew my little Betty was never coming back. Emma Ambler is the daughter of the supervising general. You recognized her, right? She was the one who delivered the city defense map, and I thought you wouldn't remember." He spoke a lot, as if he wanted to say everything he had kept inside for a lifetime. "Betty, I am truly sorry for these years. Can you not let me die at someone else's hands? Why have we become like this? Alan wasn't wrong, and neither was Zach. It's just that someone has to save the corrupt court and the collapsing world. The lives of those 50,000 soldiers must also be repaid by someone." I leaned closer to him, like when we were kids, nestled in his arms. "Zach, I'm hungry. I will cook fish for you." "Okay." When Zach returned with the grilled fish, I held a small box in my hands, containing a black pill. "I got it from Wisdom." When he saw it, he paused for a moment, then smiled at me, fixing my crooked hairpin. "What do you plan to do?" "I want to see him one more time." He took the fish from my hands and grabbed the pill. "Without the peach blossom firewood, I wonder if it still tastes the same." I took a bite. It doesn't. I didn't dare to turn back to look at him, focusing on eating the fish. Suddenly, I felt a weight on my shoulder, and the fish fell to the ground. "Zach, this fish is a bit bitter." At that moment, Gina walked in. I asked her, "Are you here to kill me?" "You knew? The blue water hairpin on your head belongs to Alan, brother." I was right next to him when he chose the hairpin. Her eyes flashed with shock, and the dagger in her hand tightened as she stood 3 feet away from me, motionless. "Why? Why not expose you?" "Perhaps I am just too lonely." Keeping Gina by my side serves as a constant reminder of what I am doing and the path I have chosen. "Is he dead?" Gina looked at Zach, who was asleep on my shoulder. "Yes." Gina left the Phoenix Ceremony Palace under the heavy night, the blue water hairpin emitting a faint blue glow in the darkness. I didn't ask her why she didn't kill me. The night was too heavy, I could barely see. I sat in the dragon throne of the main hall, wearing the red dress from when I was 15. The thick makeup couldn't hide my weary face, even though I was still not yet 20. The setting sun cast a brilliant glow, accompanied by a heavy blood color, as Alan walked into the main hall, his face still bearing the weariness of battle, the bloody sword pointed at me. "You've come." He didn't answer me, perhaps truly hating me, unwilling to even give a final farewell. But I wanted to hear him speak, stubbornly asking, "Are you planning to kill me yourself?" Alan's eyes revealed his undisguised disgust. He no longer loved me. He would never love me again. I stepped down from the dragon throne and slowly walked to his sword, pressing my chest against it. Alan's hand didn't tremble at all. I gripped his sword with my half-damaged hand and chuckled softly, "I'll return my life to you." The steadiness with which he held his sword made me feel a bit sad. When the long sword pierced my body, I still smiled at him, but then I thought my smile must look terrible. Afraid he would despise me even more, I could only endure the pain and gently furrow my brows. At that moment, I suddenly regretted the harsh decision I made for myself. If I had looked a little prettier when I met Alan, would he have cherished me a bit more? I endured the intense pain and stepped closer to him. I wanted to hug him. Just then, a woman dressed in battle armor walked in. The heroic spirit in her brow made her appear so beautiful and pure. That was Delia Sharp, his wife. I knew that even in the next life, I had no hope. Before my outstretched hand could touch Alan, I completely fell into darkness. "My name is Delia Sharp." The first time I saw Alan Watson, he was a spirited young general. When he first entered the military camp, he defeated everyone who criticized him with his powerful presence, and from then on, these people followed him like a dog follows its master. But he never fought desperately on the battlefield. I thought he was afraid of dying. Until I saw the girl beside him. She was as lively as a spirit under the moonlight. The tenderness in Alan's eyes when he looked at her was something I had never seen before, and I finally understood that he wasn't afraid of death, he just cared more for someone else. Alan said that he was heavily injured in the past, and Miss Harper endured a lot of suffering to save him. He didn't want her to suffer. Later, Miss Harper got married. After Alan returned to the border, he remained as silent as before, but everyone could tell he was different from before. It was as if his heart had died. I didn't know why I could never forget Miss Harper's smile from that time. When he was heavily injured and on the brink of death, I smiled at Alan, imitating her. Alan suddenly grabbed my hand, his eyes filled with a surge of emotions I couldn't understand. I thought I still liked this person very much. Later, after winning the battle at the border, the day we returned to the court, the emperor held a banquet to crown a new empress. I saw Miss Harper once again, but now she was the empress of great dynasty. She was still smiling. In my memories of seeing her, her face was always adorned with a smile. When the emperor asked Alan who I was, his answer surprised and delighted me. But Alan probably didn't even realize how tightly he clenched his fist under the table when the empress and the emperor leaned close together. Not long after the empress left, Alan also disappeared. His back was heavier than the night. When he returned, there was blood on his sword, and his hand trembled as he gripped it. For more than a month after that, he couldn't steady his sword, and the sword he had carried for many years also vanished without a trace. The empress married me off to someone else, and I hated her very much. But I was also very happy on the day Alan came to claim me. Alan didn't look back that day, so he didn't see the empress standing on the towering city wall, watching him leave. I thought the empress must love him very much. Otherwise, why didn't we encounter any pursuers along the way? The general guarding the city was my father. When we arrived, he directly opened the city gate. Alan told us to wait outside while he alone took his sword into the main hall of the palace. Hearing a palace servant surrender said, "The empress is inside." The empress of great dynasty, Alan's childhood sweetheart. Actually, I was scared inside. I was afraid that once she appeared, Alan would return to her side. In truth, he had never given me any promises. So, I went against Alan's orders and entered. At that moment, Alan's sword pierced her chest, and when she saw me, the empress's gaze suddenly turned into a void of silence. I thought I shouldn't have come in. She must have been very sad when she died. After she closed her eyes, Alan dropped the sword in his hand. He held her lifeless body for a day and a night. He said, "I want to get married." To whom? To her. Alan carried the person in his arms, walking past 99 steps, their red wedding garments entwined together. Ambassadors from all directions welcomed them, and officials kneeled in reverence. They congratulated the emperor and empress on their wedding. He gently placed the person in his arms into the coffin. "Betty, I'm here to marry you." She could have lived. Alan let out a bitter laugh. "There are the lives of 50,000 soldiers between us. She can't let go, and neither can I. Rather than live a life of estrangement, it's better to die with memories." After all, from the highest heavens to the lowest depths, he only had her. On that day, the palace servants of the inner court were to dispose of Betty's belongings, but I stopped them, thinking Alan might want to see them. Alan held those things in the great hall for a day and a night. I secretly went to take a look. The ground was covered with portraits, each one of her. For more than a decade in power, he worked diligently, governing the country in an orderly manner, allowing the people to live and work in peace. In the remaining time, he taught Jaden how to govern the country and bring peace to the world. He was too eager. Jaden was brought by my father, who said he was Zack Torres's child. When he was brought here, he was just a newborn, remembering nothing. A clever noble consort concealed her pregnancy and secretly gave birth to this child in the lonely palace. He was Zack Torres's posthumous son and his only child. Not long after Jaden's 13th birthday, Alan fell seriously ill. I went to see him, and he said to me, "In the future, I'll have to trouble you more with Jaden. Thank you for being willing to bear the title of the Crown Prince's mother all these years." You're quite a jerk. I'm sorry, but I really have to leave. I'm afraid I won't make it in time. I wonder if little Betty will be waiting for me by the Abyss Bridge. If she hasn't waited, I'll have to look for her for many years. He became emperor because Betty hoped he would bring a prosperous era to great dynasty. He knew it all. But he never said anything. The reason he didn't mention her name wasn't that he forgot, but because he was afraid that once he remembered, he wouldn't be able to endure these years. Delia, have the peach blossoms outside bloomed yet? Yes. This year, the peach blossoms bloomed particularly well. Place a peach blossom in front of her and my tomb. I couldn't do that. On the day he left, all the peach blossoms in the capital had withered. I ordered 2 peach trees to be transplanted in front of their tombs. I don't know if they will bloom next year.